Hi guys, my name's Rob, I'm a smartphone filmmaker, and today's video is our ultimate in-depth beginner's guide to FILMIC PRO. So whether you're starting out with this app, you're thinking about getting the app, or you're just buying the app now, this is going to be a really helpful video so you can figure out exactly how to utilize all the aspects that you see on screen with FILMIC PRO. And I'll be doing an advanced FILMIC PRO video later on in the year as well. And if you're new to this channel, I cover everything smartphone filmmaking, from short films that I make, storytelling video tips as well so you can improve your films, to accessory videos about what I use and what's really great and what you need for smartphone filmmaking, as well as really helpful FILMIC Pro tutorials like this and unique ones that are on my FILMIC Pro playlist as well, which I'll leave a link to in the description below. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button as well, so it really helps this channel grow, and let's get into it. Okay, so let's start off with recording. When you want to record a take, you have the white circle in the bottom right of the screen here. That's your record button. You simply tap that with your finger, and away you go. It turns red, and the timer goes off as well, so you can see how long your take is running for. Now you tap where it is red now to stop it, and it goes back to white, and the timer stops. So that's your record. Stop, start, just tapping on that button. You'll see in the middle of the screen here, we've got this square reticule. Now this is your focus. If you watch it, as I move it with my finger, the focus slightly changes to wherever I move it. If I move it over here, it gets a little clearer still, and we can move it back to the nose, for example, and it just gets a little bit more focused. Now on the left of that, we've got the exposure reticule, which is the circle white reticule. Same thing you can do to move that around the screen to make it darker, lighter, depending on what you want. Now, to lock these where you want them, you just tap on them. So if you tap your finger on the focus reticule here, the square one, that goes red. That means it's locked. So that won't change whilst you're recording that focus. That will hold up focus to that point. And same with the exposure reticule. Once you've got it, lock it, it goes red. That will stay locked whilst you're recording. Now, when you stop and start, you may need to reapply these again, but it's very simple, very quick to do. Now if we unlock them by tapping them again to turn them white, if you double tap on the focus reticule, that becomes enlarged. And if you double tap on the exposure reticule, that becomes enlarged as well. So now you're in auto mode. Now auto mode is essentially more of a run and gun situation. So if you're moving outside, indoors and whatnot, you're able to sort of work with the changing exposures, and you can focus on whatever you're moving to next. So if you're moving through your garden, through your house, you've got an action scene, something like that, this could work quite well. I tend to lock 99.9% of the time the exposure, just because you don't want the exposure changing. It looks really bad. If you're moving especially from indoors to outdoors, that kind of stuff, the exposure has to take a second to kind of adjust, and then it just looks really sort of amateur, basically. So if you want to get really professional looking footage, you want to lock that exposure especially. I generally always lock the focus as well, which you can do on this expanded version by tapping them to make them red, same way as we did with the small reticules. And now you've got the expanded versions. Basically, they're taking a sample from a wider area of the screen, so you're getting a lot more sample for the exposure and the focus as well. So if we untap or unlock them by tapping them, double tap them again, and that makes them go back to the small reticules. So double tap to enlarge them, double tap to make them smaller. Now if you look at the bottom of the screen where the timer is, on the right hand side of that timer you'll see a yellow dial, a yellow sort of pie chart. That's your storage. Now if you've got a newer phone, unlike mine with a bigger screen, you'll also see the storage in the top left. So that'll show you how many minutes left of footage you've got, I believe. So it may be a little bit different for you, but you'll have the pie chart next to the timer there. Above it you've got the yellow battery, which would be green if you've got a lot of battery left, and red if you haven't got much battery at all left. That's the same for the storage. It's yellow at the moment because I've got a decent amount. It's green when I've got loads, and it's red when I'm running out. So that's when you want to kind of dump some of your footage onto external hard drive and stuff like that, or your iCloud, whatever you want to do. You will have noticed as well at the bottom, as I'm talking, the audio meter is moving. So you've got the white line here. You can move that up and down. That's sort of like your gain, basically. So if you move it up, you'll pick up a lot more. If you move it down, you'll pick up slightly less. But in post, you can adjust it as well. So the sweet spot is where it is now in between these circles. So you can move it by tapping on it again and sliding up and down up and down, and you'll see the audio bar doesn't really go anywhere near that bar, the white bar at all. So if I slide it back up to where I had it roughly before, you'll see that the audio is now becoming much louder and coming up on the audio bar much clearer. Now the next thing I'm going to talk to you about is your zoom, focus and ISO dials. So this button here on the left hand side next to the colourful circles, if you tap that, you then have two dials come up, one on the right hand side which says focus, and if I tap on zoom it highlights that, zoom, and on the left hand side this is your ISO where it says 30, and below it you've got your shutter speed. Now we'll focus on the focus and zoom first. So for zoom, this dial here, you just slide it either way to zoom into something, and then the opposite way upwards to zoom out. Now with focus, you do exactly the same thing. So if you've got something about there, you want the focus here. However, if you've got something like a hand, perhaps like on the left hand side here, you can bring that focus down, which is bringing the focus towards you, so a shallow depth of field to really highlight and focus in on what's there close to the lens. And then you can move it upwards, which is away from you, so a deeper depth of field to that bear. So you go back, nice and clear, and you can get a nice shallow depth of field with this as well. And you can move that upwards to wherever you want, and it can go much further than that as well. This is just for the example. And you can actually set an automatic focus pull and a zone pull, and you can do an automatic exposure pull. Now as I say, on the left hand side you've got the ISO. If you move the dial on the left hand side down, that brings it lower and lower, your shutter speed goes down with it, and your ISO at the top there, you want to keep that below 100. Ideally you want that as low as possible, but below 100 you should be good. But if you want to get little to no noise, you want that as low as you possibly can. Now what this brings me to, the ISO, is if you go to settings, which is the cog on the bottom right next to the play button, if we tap that, we go into settings here, frame rates. Now frame rates is really, really important. So if you want to get blur, motion blur in your footage so it looks really professional and what you'd get in a cinema, that kind of level of film, Hollywood films, you want to have 24 or 25 frames per second. Now that's all set. You can move these by pressing the right button and the left button for the arrows there, so you can go up to 25, go up to 30, and you can just tap on these numbers above as well, so you can tap on 48, 50, etc. But you can only do these at certain resolutions, so play around with that and understand which resolutions don't work with one and the other, and vice versa. But 24 frames per second and 25 will be your standard. 25 is more so you can avoid the rippling effect from lights if you ever get that issue. Now, to make sure that you get motion blur, with the 24 frames per second, you want to double your shutter speed. So if we press the screen to come out of that, press the screen again to come out of the menu. If we press on the 1/48 here, and we lock that, that becomes red. So everything you're locking turns red. Now that shutter speed is locked whilst you're filming, that won't go anywhere. And you can then be free to move the ISO lower and upper. So the lowest for my phone, I'm using an iPhone 6s, so this will slightly vary on Android phones and your iPhones, but the lowest ISO on my phone is 23. So ideally, if you're lighting your scene well enough, you shouldn't have to really go above the lowest mark, but obviously certain situations you're going to have to. I've had to do that with short films. So you can then move it up, and yes, you want to keep it below 100, because if you start to get above 100, you get a lot of highlights blowing out there, and that's not going to give you any good footage. And you want to keep it just below 100. Sometimes that's too exposed as well, so you can then bring that even lower. The bottom right hand side of the screen next to the record button, you've got the play button. So if you press that one, it'll bring up all the files that you've just shot with your phone. And on the bottom right of the screenshots on each file, you've got a star. Now this one's yellow because I've tapped that star, and that means you've favorited that particular file, that shot. So if you've got shots that you want to keep hold of because you know they're the best ones, you can favorite them, star them, and press that star again to unfavorite them. And that way you can just go through selecting which ones are your favorite shots and you know you're going to use going forward. Now to delete the files, if you swipe on the actual file itself to the left, that will bring up the delete button. You can tap on that bin, the red button there, to confirm delete or cancel to not do that. And if you press that, but you decide you don't want to delete it,
you can swipe it the opposite way. So you can swipe it left to then delete, and then back again if you decide you don't want to delete that particular file. Now if you press this tick box, this allows you to select multiple clips. So if you want to save or favorite, export, delete multiple clips, this is what you do. So you can select one, it goes green, and select multiple, they go green as well. Now you can press this button here, the arrow, and that brings up the share files section. So you can share your files through AirDrop, you can email them, put them on your SanDisk flash drive like I have. Whatever way you want to export your files, it's all there as well. Now if you press this tick again, you can select one and then press this button here, which looks like a camera roll. That is your camera roll on your phone. So that's your native app that you can save them to. So you can save them to that instead of exporting them to, you know, AirDrops or flash drives. You can put it onto your phone, but I don't do that because it generally ruins the resolution. Now here we're going to look at the live analytics. So the A on the bottom left, press that, and at the top in the middle of the screen, you've got all the analytics here. The first three of those analytics are all exposure based, and the FP is your focus peak. So let's start with the zebra stripes here. When you press on that, you'll then see what areas you've got that underexposed by blue lines and overexposed by red lines. So now we tapped on it, you can see those blue lines are all the underexposed areas. So those are the areas we're going to lose some detail in your image. Now, it's not a disaster because a lot of time, if the areas are black anyway, there's not a huge amount of detail to capture. So it doesn't necessarily mean you've got a bad shot. And you can see with that red line just below the analytics, that's an area of overexposure. So you're losing details in the highlights there. So you just kind of have to get a balance. There's always something you have to sacrifice in your image, and it's up to you to decide which one you don't mind losing a bit of detail in, unless you've got really great lighting. And if you move the ISO right up, you'll start to see why you don't do that and why you should keep it under 100 or to the base if you can. You get all the red lines of where it's overexposed in the highlights. And the opposite, if you go the other way, you'll see all of the underexposed areas that are in blue. Now if you move to the next exposure tool, these basically do the same kind of thing, but this one gives you a bit more idea of where you'll get noise as well. So if you look at the blue areas here that are underexposed as well as the red there, it looks like there's kind of like dancing little bugs moving around in those areas. And that's where your noise is going to be in the image, at least the most noise that you're going to get. Then if you move to the next one that looks like a sun, you'll see that the blue is underexposed, the green is perfectly exposed, so the wood with this asparagus and stuff, that's all really well exposed, and the red is what is overexposed, so your highlights again. So it's a really, really useful tool. You don't necessarily need to use it all the time. Sometimes, you know, your eyes, you need to trust that a bit more than this, but it is a really helpful tool to have to get your exposure correct. And FP is your focus peaking. So if you tap on FP, the green lines and the outlines are basically showing you what's at its focus peak, hence focus peak. So you can see here the asparagus is really in focus, and the salt and pepper holder on the left hand side there's got some nice lines on there. If you take the focus away from the foreground into the background, you'll see that the soya cartons there, the tin, all those kind of things suddenly become much more in focus. So this is quite a handy tool to see exactly where your focus is and what detail you're getting into your image. And if you bring the focus wheel downwards, so you bring in the focus into a shallow depth closer to you, you'll see all that detail there in the asparagus heads and in the salt and pepper holder there.
So the next thing I want to talk to you about is white balance. So on the bottom left here, you've got these three coloured circles that mix together. If you tap on that, hey presto, you got white balance. Now, you got different types of lighting here to whatever suits your sort of household or environment best. You've got sunlight, very sunny conditions, white balance. These are the presets, and you've got cloudy conditions as well. It's overcast for your presets. Now, these are pretty flippin' accurate, to be honest. So most of the time, you can just use these. Otherwise, the auto white balance button, which you see on the right-hand side of this menu, if you tap that, that grey button for AWB will turn blue. And that's now auto white balancing. So if you move the camera, let's see, that will adjust. So whilst you might want that for some things, you really want that locked pretty much 99% of the time, depending on what kind of stuff you want to film. I always keep it locked. So if you tap the AWB button now, it's going to go from blue to red. Now that's automatic white balance locked. So as I move the camera around, that isn't going to shift. So that stays the same. So your footage will look really consistent and professional. And if you tap AWB once more, that's white auto balance. When it goes slightly orange, that's auto white balance that records and locks on record. So compared to the last one, which is just locked all the time, this one only locks when you're filming. So for example, if we want to move, that's still going to move around. However, when we record, that's going to stay locked, 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 no matter what we're looking at. Now if you go back into white balance, you can do presets as well. So for example, if this is a white balance that we want to keep for shooting, if we're going to, for example, have a lunch break and this lighting is going to be consistent, we can hold A and it says apply preset or save current values to preset. Now what you want to do is save current values to preset. So if we press on save current values to preset, that's spot on. Come out of that by pressing the screen. And now if we go back into our white balance, we know that A, our preset, is what we need. So if we tap on A, that brings us straight back to what we want. And we can do that with B as well. So if you want to have 2 presets for your white balance, that could be really handy if you're coming and going from shots and locations and things like that. You can also press on the white circle that's in the middle of the coloration square there, and that will adjust. So the left to right is your tint, up and down is your color temperature, and press A again to bring yourself back to the white balance that you want. If we go into the settings, the cog on the bottom right hand here, right hand side, on the top left here you've got resolution. So if we press that, you've then got your different aspect ratios. So 16:9 is essentially just a regular sort of TV look. You've got 17:9, which is a very vague kind of anamorphic look, if that. 3:2 gives you a bit more of a square. 1:1 cuts off both sides. 2:1 is going again for that anamorphic kind of look. 2:76. Some people call this letterboxing as well. And then you've got 4:3, again, more square look. And 2:391 is probably your most traditional anamorphic type of look. So you can use those if you want. But 16:9 is perfectly fine. Now below all this, you've got the 1080p HD. That's your resolution. So if you tap the left-hand triangle there, you can go down the resolutions down to 540. So that's your standard definition. HD 720p, 1080p, 2K, 3K, but then you got up to 4K. If you want to get the best possible bitrate from your footage and get the best possible picture, you want to keep your ISO right down to its minimum, have it in 4K, and have below it your bitrate as FILMIC Extreme. Again, you can press the left-hand triangle there to go down. FILMIC Quality, Apple Standard, Economy. That will save you space, but it won't give you a good image necessarily. So you really want FILMIC Extreme and 4K to get the best possible quality. That, ladies and gentlemen, is your beginner's guide to FILMIC Pro. Now, thanks so much for joining me. As I said, I'll do another video on the advanced FILMIC Pro settings, so we'll go into much more depth. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching. Take care. Subscribe, like, bye-bye.